at our bank, we're almost to $2 billion in assets. We're like 1.8, something like that. So that's a big community bank. That's a tiny bank in the system. As I said, the biggest banks are over $2 trillion in assets. We have a hard time financing crop or land in ag because the units are so huge. Like the average size of a commodity farm, which we wouldn't want to finance anyway, but is 5,000 acres. So I suspect that big finance is in league with big ag because that's the scale of capital needed. And also, since they're so vertically integrated, really big ag is big chemical. That's the way I think about it. And so probably big chemical also requires that kind of capital markets finance. Moreover, big banking has not shown any reluctance to finance almost anything. I mean, they'll say we won't finance something illegal, but that hasn't been true over time. So, right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's sort of like they'll play with anyone.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Kat Taylor. She's a positive impact investor and has started both a community bank and an organic cattle ranch to influence social and environmental injustices that she's seen in her home state of California. We've spoken to Kat before, all the way back in episode 16, and we featured part of this recent interview in the second session of our 2024 virtual symposium, In Defense of Biology. Tickets are still available to watch those recordings if you missed it, and you can watch the preview and find out all the details by visiting realorganicproject.org.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. And I'm talking with Kat Taylor today. Thank you, Kat.
You betcha.
So you are unique among the people whom I'm interviewing and being the one most deeply steeped in banking, in the world of banking. And Zephyr Teachout's book, which is really inspiring this year's symposium, is about the concentration of money and power in these various industries. Mm-hmm. And banking is one, and farming is one. And I really, when I started going in and trying to reform the USDA's organic program, I didn't get it at first. And I thought we were just dealing with somebody made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And clearly, at that point, it was about hydroponics. Clearly, it doesn't qualify for organic. It doesn't fit the law. It doesn't fit the Organic Food Production Act. It doesn't fit any of our beliefs, and it doesn't fit the international standards. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, someone's not paying attention. I discovered I was wrong. People were paying attention at the USDA. They just simply had been lobbied to go the other way. Mm-hmm. And we weren't against one little company. We were against the biggest organic produce company in the world. Mm. Our friends at Driscoll's. Mm-hmm. And also just about, one of the biggest non-organic companies in the world as well for food. They got set by their own claim 70% of the organic berry market, which is so far beyond what's considered a monopoly, right? And break them up, they're looking at maybe 4% of an industry might be considered a monopoly. Although a local monopoly would still be a monopoly, and they might only be 0.5% of the national. But so you've worked a lot in food, and you've worked a lot more in banking. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of the things that Zephyr said is that it always comes back to Wall Street. It always comes back to these big banks, which are woven in to these industries. Do you agree with that? Can you tell me what banking looks like and how it relates to the rest of our lives? Mm-hmm.
So you hit a subject near and dear to my heart. I will say I'm a naif. I didn't grow up I kind of grew up in banking as my grandfather ran a bank, Crocker National Bank. but I didn't expect to be a banker. I don't have a storied career in finance or anything like that. But being naive is actually an advantage sometimes too, in that you look at a system with fresh eyes. Past is not prologue. You don't just take it for granted that that's the way it's always been and that's the way it always will be. So my partner, Tom StCyr, and I started a bank on the hunch that something was terribly wrong in the financial system. It seemed to be not serving people and planet, and it was very consolidated and corrupt. So in 2002, I think there were 16,000 banks in America. Now there are about 5,000. So that's a lot of consolidation. Banking and the financial system is one of the biggest industries, if not the biggest industry in the world. Just to sort of right size it, 2022 or 2021 GDP in the US was $23 trillion about. The total asset size of the top 10 energy companies worldwide, and that, by the way, that includes all the big ones, but is about 10 trillion in assets. One's a revenue number, one's an asset number, but still, just to give you the size of this sense of the scale. The financial service system in the United States alone, which admittedly has all the big money center banks, is 123 trillion in assets. Just think of that. 23 trillion of revenue in the United States in 1 year, 10 trillion of assets in the biggest energy companies, and 123 trillion in the financial system service just in America. You probably need to add another 60 trillion if you count the shadow banking system, things that are happening on the blockchain or in the DAOs or just not detected. So that's a massive industry, and it's powerful because of three things. First of all, it drives every other industry. Every other industry is dependent upon finance and bank financed as well. It's also a highly leveraged model. So essentially, this is not the fractional reserve system, which is more complicated to go into, but a simplified version of that is in our bank, for every $1 of equity we put in the bank, we can collect $9 of deposits and make a $10 loan. So that's 10 times leverage. The biggest banks are levered much, much more. Bear Stearns, when it collapsed, was 33 times levered. So in addition to that, when you make loans, they come back and you make them again. So the money has cumulative effect over time. So these are the sort of powerful dynamics of banking. But it is also not allegiant to what I believe it should be. Banking to me should be the original, most powerful form of crowdfunding, meaning that people take their idle cash, their deposits, they put them in banks, ostensibly to finance the world in which they actually wish to live. But they've been severed from their agency and accountability over where their money sleeps at night. So the biggest banks in the system are literally using our own deposits against us in the main. And there's a litany of a parade of horribles that they have and continue to march out against us. 10 million homes lost in the foreclosure crisis of 2008, massive penalties for consumer fraud that they just pay as a cost of doing business. 1/3 of bank tellers are in some form of public assistance, shifting a private cost to a public resource. Hundreds of billions of dollars of fossil fuel finance since Paris Accords, where they showed up and made a lot of claims that they haven't followed through on. So the system has to change. And consolidation is one of the problems of it. And I'll give you a real-time, right now, example. After the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and then of First Republic Bank, there was a flight to subsidy of the deposits. That's not a flight to safety. The big five money center banks are not safe. They're not reasonably managed. They're not aligned with our values. They are simply subsidized by the American taxpayer because they are once again too big to fail. So if you're nervous, or if you have fiduciary duty, or your venture overlords tell you, get your money in a money-centered bank, you do it. And we saw a rush to subsidy of deposits in the United States landscape to the big banks after those failures. That's a real problem because those big banks don't finance Main Street economy in the main. They are in the capital markets. They are kind of like big hedge funds. And the real banks that finance the circular and local living economies of the Main Street economy in America, upon which we all depend, where the lion's share of the high road jobs come from, is done by the regional, community, and CDFI banks. If we suck all the deposits out from those banks and send them to the big banks, we're going to see a credit contraction in Main Street economy, and that's dangerous for us all. Our bank, Beneficial State Bank, has managed to hold onto our deposits because we offer insured products. We're considered very safe and sound. And we have alignment. People bank with us for 100 reasons, because they're like you, they're terribly concerned about organics and where that's going, or they don't want to have anything to do with fossil fuels or private prisons or extractive finance, or they just want to make sure that their community is well served by an economy that has access to bank credit.
Okay. There's a lot there, of course. So just to tease it apart, the big banks keep getting bigger.
Yep.
And as is true of every industry in America at this point.
Yep.
There is this tendency, trend, I'm not sure if it's inevitable, towards consolidating money and thus power. Mm-hmm. So as they get more consolidated, they can basically tell the government and other businesses what to do. Mm-hmm. Right? Yep. And that's true for banking as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The bank lobby is very powerful, as is the big ag lobby.
Very powerful. All of the food system, it's not just big ag, but it's big retail too. Mm-hmm. You know, the stores that we sell to, 3 of the chains I've sold to now are owned by one Dutch multinational. Mm. These are big chains, like Stop and Shop's a big chain. And you know, Albertsons and Kroger's and Amazon and Whole Foods. So as that happens, people lose choice. I'm not sure people are as aware of that in banking as they are in food, and they're not that aware of it in food. They go to the store and they go, look at all the choices I have. Mm-hmm. But actually the choices are fewer and fewer small local farms. Yeah. And by small, I don't mean tiny. I mean, you know, even 500-acre vegetable farms are no longer being welcomed on the shelves. Yeah. So as they lose these choices, I think the world gets to be a poorer place, and we lose a lot of good things. Tell me about in banking. What do we lose when Bank of America wipes out another little bank? And that's interesting. I didn't think of that when people get scared, they put their money in Bank of America and they pull it out of their local bank because Bank of America is not going to fail.
Right. Yeah, it won't be allowed to.
It won't be allowed.
Well, so there is that credit contraction in the local economies. It happens when banks consolidate. There are just fewer community and regional banks to serve local economies. The biggest banks set price, basically, in the industry. They set term. So when you pull your deposits out and go to one of the big money center banks, likely you're attracted by remote deposit of your check while you're reading your New York Times on a Sunday morning, or there's so many branches, or the online banking is superior, things like that. What you don't realize is when you put your deposits there, you are backing a lending practice that's working quite heavily against you. So it is pernicious kind of dynamic that the money goes to the big banks and then they finance, you know, a world where they burn down the planet and exploit a bunch of people. Sorry, it sounds so harsh and what's the right word? Immoderate, I guess, but it's of crisis proportions. The banks immoderate. Are killing us. Yeah.
Okay.
So also, what I see happening in the big ag system was identified for me by a paper that Oxfam International wrote probably 20 years ago now, called Cereal Secrets, CEREAL, about the big trading companies, Archer Midland Daniel, Bunge, Cargill, Louis Dreyfus. They call them the ABCDs. And it was the story of the financialization of our food system, where now on the value chain, the lowest return goes to the land steward, lease or owned, and the highest return goes to the commodity future trading firms, Goldman Sachs, India, China, governments, you know, and it's siphoning off all the return from the very essential act of land stewardship, value add product, small distributors, so on, and making that job making that business model broken. It's, the margins in farming, as you say, are very, very poor. And that leads not only to precarity of the producers, particularly smaller scale, family owned, organic, regenerative, but it also really interferes with succession. I mean, how many young people want to go into farming right now because it's hard to make a living, much less send your kids to college and have a retirement asset. So I feel the same thing is happening in the financial system, that we're driven more and more to such powerful actors that we have to take price and term off of them, and they're very sneaky. So while Chase may look like it has great pricing on its checking accounts and benefits and no fees, the hidden fees are incredible. And when WAMU failed, Washington Mutual, they did a calculus that their free checking accounts cost the average account holder $500 a year. That's going backwards. That's your savings being eaten up and going into a deficit position in many cases, since the average American, I think, doesn't have, I forget what it is, $1,200 for an emergency or something. It's a low number. So this can be reversed, and I won't add to this very long answer, but if we can talk about platform cooperatives, because what you identified to me is a global phenomenon, that now that there's almost unlimited computing power and the world is connected, even low-income communities are early adopters of cell phone, smartphone, etc. It increases the chance of network effects arising and taking hold, and network effects produce monopolies and oligopolies. That's what Netflix, Amazon Prime, Facebook, Instagram, Amazon, etc. To me, those are based on network effects, and once they get built, they're very hard to dismantle.
Okay, so just slow it down for a minute. For people, what is a network effect?
Yeah. So I am an amateur explainer, meaning I just learned this a minute before I explain it to somebody else. But
I'm a 10-year-old kid, so I'm going, well, I don't get it. What's a network effect?
So it helps if we workshop these terms together. So my understanding of a network effect, a network effect happens when the value to the membership increases with every member who joins. It could be a member, it could be a user, it could be a consumer, whatever it is. Email. Civilization actually is kind of a network effect. So they tend to spiral up. The more members who join, the more that membership offers the dominant competitive offering, the more members who join. So it's spiraling up. And that's why you see, in my opinion, you see big corporations getting venture funding for years with no revenue, with no earnings, because they're establishing a network effect. They are willing to give the membership away or sell under market in order to attract all those users and create the network effect. They also reverse network effects. The old-fashioned way is to call it as rats leaving a sinking ship. But if you remember MySpace, it was here for a whip stitch. It was the Facebook-like platform, and the network effect went away for them when Facebook built more quickly built a much more competitive platform on which the network effect rests. So all the bells and whistles and functionality and features and new products and stuff, that's what those platforms are constantly building. They are capital providers building the floor upon which we walk to hold the network effect. You can lose a network effect by competition from a superior platform. You can also use it from a threat to the membership. So when Facebook revealed that Cambridge Analytica had come on the platform and was basically using the members in a bad way, Facebook was terrified they would lose not just members, but maybe the network effect. This is my opinion. They instantly bought Instagram and WhatsApp. Maybe that was on their roadmap anyway, but they had to buy other network effects onto which the defection could go. So if you were going to get mad and leave Facebook, you went to Instagram. That actually is what happened. When Instagram had TikTok threatening it as a competitor platform, it immediately built Reels. So the capital providers they are truly adding value, but they aren't the only ones adding value. Those network effects are really platform cooperatives, and I'll explain that term too. A platform cooperative recognizes that more than the capital providers are creating value on the platform. It's just not cooperatively held. So yes, Instagram built Reels, but most of the value on Instagram comes from not just the user's data, although that's a big factor. It's from sharing, shopping, querying, creating content, connecting with others. That creates value on the platform that secures the network effect and attracts more value production. The problem is it's not compensated. In economic terms, in a platform cooperative, finally that social production, which is value created not by the capital holders, but by everyone else in the mix, is socially compensated. So in a platform cooperative, you would actually accord not just revenue, like YouTube is doing ride sharing now, they're giving some revenue to their most prolific content creators, but the more magical thing would be to give them a micro share of equity, ownership in the platform as verified on the blockchain, which over time proliferates the ownership, control, and governance of the platform. We're not getting rid of monopolies and oligopolies, in my humble opinion, because of those network effects. They're going to keep happening unless we have massive social disruption of some sort, which is also possible. So in the meantime, why don't we proliferate the ownership, control, and governance of them so that they don't beat us up? They are we. Where it's no longer they and us, and where they have all the power. We have power on the network, even majority power on the network effect. Why would the capital holders give up any equity to the users who are creating all that value? Because it's the best way to secure the network effect from a defection. Once you own a little bit of that platform, you're not going to leave. You're going to stay there, defend threats, add value, keep adding value. And that should be something very worthwhile to the capital providers, because in the other scenario where they lose the network effect, they could go from being worth $200 billion to zero. In this scenario, they go from being worth $200 billion to $100 billion. That's still pretty good. So thank you for letting me spin that out, but that's kind of where I'm spending a lot of my energy and attention right now. In finance, in ag, in media, all the systems that have become increasingly corrupt through consolidation.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what can we do about solutions as we look at this. People are so confused, and we all get the question, "What can we do?" As if I knew. So I'm trying to understand. Well, what can we do? And it seems like there are two paths, and one is let's call it the Thoreau path.
Yeah.
Which is, I want to do the right thing in my life because I'm more who I want to be if my actions are in alignment with my values. And the other is the Martin Luther King approach, which is, I want to do all that, but I also want to create legislative change.
Yeah.
So King was quite strategic in his acts of civil disobedience. I don't think Thoreau was at all strategic. He didn't really want to change the government. He was interested in his own salvation. So they're both important, in my opinion. If we say, well, you should make sure that you keep your account in a beneficial bank, that's taking personal responsibility. But
Yes.
it's not necessarily, well, it's not at all changing the system unless we're so successful at getting millions of people to do it that the system shifts.
Yeah.
What's your answer to that? I'm sure you've thought long and hard about this.
Yeah. To date, we've pursued 3 strategies in our theory of change because we don't want to be a good bank in a bad system, to your point. That's not enough for where we are right now. So we need to flip the whole system away from a consolidated industrial model to a regenerative distributed model. So, maybe a federation of, once again, 12,000 banks that are medium sized. Maybe they're not itty bitty and don't have good unit economics, but they're reasonable sized and allegiant to our values and supporting local economies and the planet. The 3 strategies are, first, the one you mentioned, a consumer strategy, which is inspire people to move their money into a bank that's accordant with their values, that where they take up their agency and their accountability. So it's not just they're not mistreating me, but I like what they're lending to. That's the way we brand ourselves. Come to us, you'll get fair financial services. Our lending practice is not just not doing bad things, it's proactively financing the renewable economy that's also racially and gender just. So those consumer movements got some loft when the activists around other issues like the Dakota Access Pipeline or Black Lives Matter recognized the power of finance, and they started to call for people to pull their money from the banks financing the pipeline. I think in the first month, $100 million left the banks. That's tiny in the banking system because the biggest banks are well over $2 trillion in assets, but it's a start. We add on to that consumer layer industry relations is what we call it. We try to convince other banks that we just have a better business model. It's more resilient, it's more reliably profitable, it doesn't have reputational risk. So you come to us, even if it's just a better way to make a dollar and a line, and you have new generations who are increasingly going to insist on this. They're going to be sophisticated enough to know that your lending practice is bad for them or that you're overcharging them, or underpaying your colleagues, or throwing your garbage over the fence, all the things that corporations do to maximize profit. So that's sort of in the stakeholder capitalism realm of we can get to almost like a compact as a society that will only support companies that recognize all their stakeholders and provide benefit to all and harm to none. And that would be like the B corporations. And, there's markers that we have to indicate that for somebody who doesn't have hours to pore over all the financials and so on. The third layer is we call regulatory, but it's policy as well. So we're asking our regulators to ask more of banks. We're already regulated not just for safety and soundness, but for a variety of non-financial performance indicators like fair lending or anti-money laundering or cybersecurity, these things that keep society safe and fair. It hasn't been done perfectly because the banks redlined for decades against Black and brown communities, but it's a start of saying a bank is a quasi-public institution. It owes us more than just being a safe place to put our money. On top of the regulatory, we venture into policy all the time. So I'll give you two examples. We were very instrumental in actually reorganizing the main banking relator, which is in California, biggest bank market, the Department of Business Oversight, into the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. So that was, you guys need to regulate for more than just financial soundness. You should be enabling beneficial innovation, and you should be protecting consumers in in California's markets from bad bank behavior. We did that because it had been done at the federal level in the establishment of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau under the Obama administration with Rich Cordray and Elizabeth Warren, but it was dismantled by Trump. So we thought we need to have one in California. It's not only good for us here, it will regulate the markets outside of California, because banks don't build product for California and then build something different for Wisconsin, just like the automakers build their cars for California and Wisconsin gets the same cars. The other policy that we're advocating for right now, and this is not, mostly the big banks advocate for policy that's self-serving. We won't do that. We will only advocate for policy that we think is altruistic and good for the whole system. So the other one we're advocating for is to raise the FDIC insurance coverage level from $250,000 to $5 or $10 million. That sounds like a pro-bank sort of move. Like, why would we want to let the banks have that? But if you think about it, de facto, the biggest banks in this system have unlimited FDIC insurance. They will never fail. That's the equivalent of unlimited FDIC insurance. And that's at the cost of the taxpayer. The banks pay premiums into the FDIC insurance fund, but if it's not enough, the taxpayer backs it up. So why should they have unlimited? And we have such a small amount of protection. It doesn't cover 3 months of an average company in the Main Street economy's payroll. And they have to keep that in cash. So let's give a limit on certain accounts that allow for the protection of workers' wages, essentially, if you think about that, and keep the deposits in our institutions, because it's no longer seen as risky to have them there. You're not going to lose your payroll cash. It's going to be protected by the FDIC. And I think we're a safer bet anyway. The big banks are full of risk, as we saw in 2008.
Right, right. Okay. I'm kind of curious, just how did you go about, who did you lobby? And I mean, what was your coalition of people supporting that, that effort?
So banking like food attracts almost every stakeholder group just through a different door.
Yeah.
So a food example, a coalition that we helped lead just provided the political cover for the governor to allocate permanent funding to universal free meals in school. 6 million California school children will now have free breakfast and lunch, no matter their status. They don't have to report, they don't have the stigma. We're working feverishly to make sure it's healthy food, but it's a moral thing to do for the children, for their educational readiness and lifelong health. It's also the right thing to do for the supply chain. It's a big demand trigger for regenerative organic product.
Can I just ask about how many of those kids are food insecure, would you guess?
So the food insecurity standards for free and reduced lunch are low for California because it's such a high cost of living state. Nonetheless, a lot of the districts are 95% eligible for free and reduced. Some are not, but we have a poor, low to moderate income base in our school population. A lot of the wealthier children are going to private schools or charter schools or whatever. Right. So a very high percentage. They estimate a third of the children, at least a third of the children, I think in California, if not the nation, receive the majority of their calories from school food.
Yeah.
So it's it's a crisis that we're not, and that we don't see food as part of education is conceptually problematic.
And huge impacts on those kids about what they get to eat at school.
And the first 5 years, if you have a heavy salt, fat, and sugar diet, you're going to have a lifelong trajectory of disease, of serious disease. So it was very important to do. The coalition of 208 organizations was not just food, ag, and education, which you would expect. It was healthcare, labor, economy, climate, environment, because all those groups saw something to gain from universal free healthy meals. They also recognized that if they went individually on their single issues, they get nothing. When they go together, they get it all. So that's a little bit of the DFPI, is that we are able to attract a lot of consumer protection groups who saw that finance is not only a dangerous product in and of itself, as Elizabeth Warren said. You can't sell a toaster that blows up in your kitchen, but you can sell a mortgage that blows up your home, sort of thing. But also that if we could get it right in California, it would spread throughout the country, and that bank finance drives a lot of other consumer protection issues, like e-commerce, like how things are financed and how you end up paying 4 times the cost of your sofa because you got high-priced appliance or sort of on-site furniture finance and stuff.
Do the consolidated banks, which is, as I say, what we see in every industry, are they blood brothers and sisters to consolidation in food and consolidation in retail? Is there a natural recognition, or it doesn't have to be personal, but is there a natural alliance there?
Probably. I haven't studied it enough, so I'm going to just say what I think I could deduce. First of all, we at our bank, we're almost to $2 billion in assets. We're like 1.8, something like that. So that's a big community bank. That's a tiny bank in the system. As I said, the biggest banks are over $2 trillion in assets. We have a hard time financing crop or land in ag because the units are so huge. Like the average size of a commodity farm, which we wouldn't want to finance anyway, but is 5,000 acres. So I suspect that big finance is in league with big ag because that's the scale of capital needed. And also, since they're so vertically integrated, really big ag is big chemical. That's the way I think about it. And so probably big chemical also requires that kind of capital markets finance. Moreover, big banking has not shown any reluctance to finance almost anything. I mean, they'll say we won't finance something illegal, but that hasn't been true over time. So,
Right.
yeah. So, I mean, it's sort of like they'll play with anyone.
Yeah. Do you think that we have antitrust laws that are not enacted? They're not applied, and that kind of,
Yeah.
I think that ended with Robert Bork, maybe, that they said, we're going to have a new interpretation for what it means to be a destructive monopoly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they said, as long as it's not raising the price of the product, we're okay with it.
Yeah.
And when the laws were passed, that was not the point, to have cheap consumer goods. The point was to have a viable democracy,
Yeah.
and to stop it from a small number of people having a huge amount of power and influence
Yeah.
over what happens. Do you think it's possible to bring those out of the closet, dust them off,
Yeah.
and go forth and break them up?
I see signs of light and I see obstacles. This is not a great Supreme Court for us. Once again, honestly, with all due respect to the justices who are exemplary people in the main, the Supreme Court to me has been late to the right decision and often wrong. It's not been a good phenomenon for us. I mean, just think about slavery or a lot of other issues of the day. So I don't have a lot of hope that the underlying foundational elements of antitrust law, which I don't know that well, will be somehow improved. But the signs of life I saw is one of the first actions Biden's Department of Justice took was to go after the big chicken manufacturers, whatever they call themselves, for price fixing.
Yeah.
Which is an antitrust kind of action. So I was thrilled with that because to my knowledge, we hadn't seen an enforcement action in decades in the ag system.
Obama's administration tried to go after the chicken industry, and then they got their butts kicked in the midterms, and they backed off.
Yeah.
And Vilsack and Holder were going around and having hearings, and all these small chicken farmers were coming up and really putting a lot on stake to testify against Tyson, you're right, against Purdue, and then they got left out to dry because the administration just pulled back. They said, we're being branded anti-business. We're not going to survive with that.
Yeah.
So it's a political reality that it's not as simple as, if we could only elect a champion who would do this, they're still part of a system too.
Yeah. And it's self-reinforcing, to your point. Once you have enough power to be corrupt in your lobbying, the lobbying helps you have more power, and it just ratchets up. And so I don't want to sound so hopeless about it, but 3 companies control 95% of the beef market, and the mega dairies are as persistent as ever in growing and actually pulling down a bunch of subsidy. I heard a bunch of the commodity funding that the Biden administration thankfully got through the USDA, it ends up going to the mega producers because it's easier to give them $5 million than to hand out $50,000.
Oh, Kat, it was a lot more than $5 million. They were getting $155 million.
Yeah.
And they were the very worst players in the food industry. And this was all in the name of climate smart agriculture.
I know.
It was wonderful that the USDA finally acknowledged that this is an important thing that we need to deal with.
Yeah.
But it was such a retro response. I mean, they insisted that there be a BIPOC organization with each grant, so they trotted out a small group. Yeah. They gave a tiny bit to organic, but most of it by far went to the Iowa pork growers and
that's that corruption.
And Syngenta and Cargill and of course it's corruption.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking because those very companies are the ones who are now defining regenerative for the world.
Yeah.
And who's to say, I mean, they have a huge microphone.
Yeah.
Who's to say that we can stop that? I don't think so.
Yeah. And even the idea of defining regenerative practice is not prescriptive. It's a set of principles, very context driven. So giving it a definition is actually going to undermine what it means to me.
Very much so.
Yeah. I will say that there's another bright light, and it's a person. So I don't believe in single hero histories, but it's very important to have visionaries in the right place. And Farm Service Agency, which has hitherto been, a vehicle of oppression and thievery in the farm credit system, stealing black farmland and everything, just horrible things going on all over, is now run by Zach Ducheneau from the Intertribal Ag Council, who I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name of this right, but he started the CDFI Asitane, I think, in Indian country, where he comes from. He's a financial wizard, as well as a fifth-generation cattle rancher in the regenerative space. And he's changing the paradigm of USDA finance. And if he gets that done and it is canonized there, it will mean the difference between investing in our land stewards and food and regenerative food system and crippling it with high debt that keeps it locked in the industrial model.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a bright light.
That's a bright light. Well, we got to celebrate. When I spoke last night at Frog's Leap, and they're like, "This is celebration, Dave," because I know it's celebratory.
No Dave Downers.
No Dave Downers, but so I tried to be extremely positive. Then other people came in, with some of the other uglier truths.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing what the EU is doing.
Yeah.
The Farm to Fork initiative. He's fighting them tooth and nail. So we have our USDA, of course, is fighting to the death for the chemical lobby, and the EU is, I don't think they'll get there, but they've made a commitment to reducing their chemical inputs by 50% in 10 years in agriculture.
That's incredible.
And increasing their certified organic land up to 25% of their farmland being certified as organic. These are truly radical, aspirational things, and it's almost ignored even by our friends in this country. And who isn't ignoring it is the chemical industry and the USDA.
Yeah.
And they're ready to fight to the death on this one.
Yeah.
The fight seems to be most brutal in Africa. There's a lot going on there now with
that's a big land grab there too.
Big land grab.
And that was the dumping ground for commodity food in America forever, destroying the otherwise brilliant, beautiful African markets.
Yes. And now they've got the Green Revolution as packaged by Bill. And honestly, I thought people were picking on him. I mean, he has all his problems, but another book for you to read is Tim Wise's book, Eating Tomorrow.
Are you referring to the bill I think you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, right.
I've been in opposition for a long time.
In opposition, but I thought he's being made into the boogeyman a bit in Africa, and I talked to Tim Wise a couple of weeks ago and read his book, and I realized, no, this is bad. Mm-hmm. And
so here's because I'm going to have to go, I think, but I want to end on a positive note.
Absolutely.
I mentioned about platform cooperatives, what capital provider in their right mind, meaning the current owners, would give away their equity. I'm actually not expecting it to come from the incumbent leadership, but they have partners who go by one name because they're so famous. Speaking of Bill, Melinda, Priscilla, Mackenzie, Laureen. I think those are change agents because they don't think past this prologue. This world has not been good enough to women or their children, and they're willing to try new things. And some of them already have a commitment to organic, like Laureen. Yeah. So that's who I'm putting my money on, and I'm feverishly trying to figure out how to convene the likes of those people who, they own a big part of those companies, I think.
Right.
Because they're in community property states. And anyway, just an idea to leave on, but it's not over.
It's not over.
Yeah.
All right. Kat, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.